Thank you very much. Next item, Council Ziegler, Chapter 3, bicycles.
This has been continued from the last public hearing because Councilman Derby was unable to attend. However, with Councilman Derby absent again tonight, I would like to open the public hearing, and I think that we should move forward, and I will ask for a motion following the public hearing.
Okay, that said, we did entertain a large amount of correspondence and communication on this already. If there's any new members of the audience who would like to come forward to speak on this, I'll entertain them first. Seeing none, if anyone would like to come up to the podium and speak to this issue, please step forward, state your name and address for the record. Please come up to the podium, please.
Might I ask one question? Is there negative commentary to which I might speak, but I have not yet seen?
If you come to the podium, you're welcome to ask that question and we'll address it.
Sorry to break the rules.
Did they open?
Okay.
Okay, this is Ralph Sturgeon, 11 Elliott Street, East Hampton. I spoke in favor of the new ordinances last time. I have nothing more to say in favor, but I would ask that if there has been negative comments made or brought forward that might be shared with me, that maybe I might speak to them in rebuttal.
Any of the councilors have anything they'd like to ask?
Well, it wasn't so much asked, but to answer your question, there were some concerns that were raised. Some of those concerns, the negative concerns, have really just been addressed because the intention of putting this forward was to update and bring things in alignment with, Mass General Law 85, Section 11B. The concerns were more specific of why were we taking out safety precautions such as reflectors or some other language when in fact it's not so much that we're removing it, but it's just already in line with the Massachusetts general law. So it wasn't any overarching negativity towards
In that case, I won't bore anybody with saying the same things.
I do have some.
Yes.
I have gone through a document in detail. I have a number of concerns. The first one starts right with the definition. The definition, as you read it now, can actually be spelled out as a skateboard. Even though we're talking bicycles, I need to be clear that definition isn't broad enough in my mind to actually assess that. There were also a bunch of minor little things in the current presentation that concern me that I'm hoping that we can address, make some notes, is in the section 3.17 where it talked about the restricted usage. I noted, well, what about utility vehicles on the Manhattan Rail Trail? What do they qualify as? And I noticed that the footnote that used to be in the section has been removed, which allowed some flexibility by permit from the select board. And I had a number of other things which actually boiled down to one major comment, in that I looked at what we did with the building codes, where we added a couple of small items, very specific, and thought, why aren't we doing that with this bicycle ordinance? Why aren't we going with the adopting the state regulations and then adding, for point of discussion, a definition and the downtown business streets as part of our ordinance, so that as the state law changes, our ordinance automatically updates. And those are things I will be asking. If you would like to address them, you can, but I will be asking them later on.
As to the first one, the restricted use, that wording, everything about the Manhattan Trail came from the Manhattan Trail Committee.
Okay.
That was submitted directly by them, and I would try to answer anything, since my wife happens to be on the committee and we've discussed it, but I may not be the best one to answer that. To your last point, I believe the counselors on the committee may recall that the first words out of my mouth when we talked about this whole thing was, why are we doing this? We have the state law. The state law basically, one, does not address the Manhattan Trail, therefore that's for us to address in the city. And the state law requires us to define the downtown business district for purposes of promoting pedestrian safety by limiting bicycle riding on the sidewalk. To my personal mind, and this I believe I said to the councilors at the start, those are the only two things we should have. That everything else has been addressed by the state, does not need us to address it separately, and maybe we really can't, we may not be legally allowed to contradict state law when the legislature has acted on a question.
Okay. I do have another one, one of the concerns here that I noted, and it was in one of the definitions. It was section 3-38, and it was the word down the bottom there, number B, where it's now just been reduced to, which I like the idea that we're trying to simplify the language. Trailers and seats that are designed for transporting children are permitted. The word design, without qualifying it with some kind of standard, in my worldview, can run us into problems. I don't know how anybody else feels, but that one didn't make me warm and fuzzy. When the state regulations actually specify a certain standard for
Okay.
some of those things.
I can't necessarily, it may not be my place to answer
No, you
why
can't,
that was
but, yeah.
simplified that much. I believe from our discussions with the committee that the desire was to simplify things as much as possible. You will also note that the helmet regulation, the helmet ordinance
I was actually glad to see that
does
one.
not specify the standards which it must meet.
Yep.
And my personal feeling is both of those, I just defer to the state law and question why we should even have that section in the ordinances.
Okay. Because this is a public hearing, what I'll do, if you have any other questions from any of the counselors, or if not, I'll allow other people who would like to come forward and speak to this to step up to the podium and
Thank you, sir.
address the council on this. Since we have spoke, I'm going to limit the discussion to 3 minutes. If you got a blurb you want to come up and speak to, or if you want to address the questions that were already brought up, that's okay too. Just please come forward and state your name and address for the record.
My name is Eli Damon. I live at 14 Ward Avenue, and I already spoke some about this last time, about some things that I liked about the recommendation, and some things that I did not. And I basically I agree with what the other speakers said as well, and I guess one thing I'd also like to talk about is the process by which this recommendation came to be. It's unusual for the public to participate in the drafting of ordinances, and so I appreciate the committee entertaining this new kind of process. At the same time, there are some things that I'm dissatisfied with. So, I'm sorry. So, I mean, I believe that I'm kind of a minimalist when it comes to laws. I believe there should only be a law when it is the best solution for a compelling problem, all right, and that fact should be demonstrated by some kind of reasoning and evidence. And I was frustrated during the discussions that it seemed we were trying to put in language in the ordinances to solve a problem that no one could really show actually existed. And the other thing is that I was expecting the chief of police to participate in the conversation. I was disappointed that he did not, except that apparently he issued an opinion, but he did not issue it publicly with any kind of supporting reasoning or anything, which means that I, as a member of the public, cannot critique it. And I feel that it's somewhat anti-democratic for a public official to be influencing legislation without that influence being out in the open where it can be critiqued. So I guess that's all I have to say, in addition to what I said last time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member of the public would like to come forward to speak to this issue? Please step to the podium, state your name and address for the record.
Tim Carey, Plain Street. Just want to speak briefly in support of the ordinance. I'm a commuter between here and Amherst, and my feeling on the ordinance is it should match the state law as much as possible to avoid confusion between both me as a cyclist and any officers. I've had an encounter with a couple of officers in neighboring towns, and it's just confusing between the town or city's bylaws and the state bylaws. So I really appreciate all the work the subcommittee's done on this, and I support this.
Thank you. Any other members of the public would like to come forward and speak to this issue? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to make one final comment. What you heard from me in my brief statements was I truly believe that, well, I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I think this needs some fine tuning before we actually come up with a formal proposal for the council. You're welcome to disagree. That's a democratic process. I will turn the table over to Councilor Ziegler first, because he still has the floor, to determine if he still wants to go forward with the discussion and vote tonight.
Well, I do believe that Mr. Derby, excuse me, Councilman Derby had a lot of input and had a lot to do with some of the drafting of the language here and recognizing some of your concerns, specifically about the skateboard. I would move to continue the public hearing to September 5th.
Okay?
Excuse me, I propose a motion to move, that we continue the public hearing until September 5th.
Is that a motion, or you're gonna make a motion?
I'm making the motion right now.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion to continue this public hearing till September 5th, 2012. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Councilor Rist?
Yes, Councilor Cobb, believe it or not, I agree with you that there needs to be fine tuning. I really do always support the work, the hard work of our ordinance committee, and they've worked very hard on this. What concerns me is the gentleman mentioned that apparently state law does not deal with the Manhattan Rail Trail or wants the business district defined with regard to bicycles. But when you have state law specifically addressing part of what's in this ordinance, in my opinion, we should, for the purpose of helping our residents who might come to want to know about the bicycle law, we should duplicate, not necessarily the entire law, but duplicate the main parts of that language. And I refer to the definition, as you mentioned, because the definition which deals with pedals in bicycles is quite clear, would eliminate skateboards. And I don't know why that definition had to be revised. In fact, I think it's confusing when it does, and maybe Councilor Ziegler can address it. Or I would ask the committee to, one, address only those issues that duplicate state law and use the language in state law so there's no confusion between our ordinance and that language, because we cannot override state law. And if just to use the skateboard example, a police officer decided to get a skateboard off of the Manhattan Rail Trail, our law doesn't disallow that, but state law does, I guess. So there's a confusion there. So I'd like to recommend the ordinance committee look at the language's confusion between state law and our own ordinance. And I really like the fact that it's streamlined, but whatever we put in that is addressed by state law should mimic it, should duplicate it, in at least in a paraphrased way, so it doesn't seem to eliminate what the intent, and I think that skateboard issue is an example,
this side.
and the rest of it. So I would like to ask the ordinance committee to look at that and see if they could look at state law versus our ordinance and make the languages match a little better if it's necessary.
Any members on this side would like to speak to the issue? Councilor
Just,
Hagan?
I would go again with a motion to continue it for a vote. I appreciate what you brought up about the skateboard issue. The one I had, just so that I get it on the table, because I will bring it up at the next time in the voting, and it goes a little what Councilor Riss just said, is I understand the need for bicycles to go on the sidewalk in certain areas of town. I mean, in Precinct 1, Northampton Street, I don't know, that's a dangerous place to ride a bicycle out on the state highway, and certainly you can use the sidewalks. But by the same token, some of those sidewalks are less than 2 feet wide and within a curb's width from the road itself. And what's proposed in here about bicycles on the sidewalk says that they be appropriate in their speed, and they stay to the right and allow for the safe yielding to others. But I guess I look at what the state law says, and to me, once you go on a sidewalk, the burden now becomes to the bicyclist, not to the pedestrian. And the state law reads that the bicycle, if he rides on a sidewalk, will yield the right of way to pedestrians and give an audible signal before overtaking or passing any pedestrian. And, I've been surprised myself walking on that street of somebody coming up behind me, and they don't do it intentionally, but a bicycle comes up and, it can they just kind of go around you or go up on the grass around you. A lot of the senior citizens walk, and I just think that part should still stay in the law if we're gonna allow them on sidewalks, to make it very specific that if bicycles are gonna get on a sidewalk, that the pedestrians have the right of way, not the bicycles. And if it means they have to stop and get off their bicycle and walk it around a senior citizen who's in the middle of the sidewalk, so be it. So that would be the one aspect I'd like to see changed before the final thing. But I do applaud the committee. I think it's something that's, it's a lot of work, and I think to narrow it down and get it to, in a more condensed form would be helpful. And I do want to say that.
Councilor Psychowski.
I was gonna say something else, but Counselor Hagan, you just brought up a good thing here. Are you suggesting that in the ordinance that we have, where every bicycle in town has a bell on it so they can signal to everybody? I think, when I was a kid, we had to have one or we couldn't get our bikes.
Well, it does say signal. I don't know.
I think it'd be a good
It says you
idea.
can't have a horn
Thank
or
you for the
It says
idea.
you can't have a horn or a siren, but I do think that you should make yourself known if you're coming up
Right.
behind a pedestrian, whether
Thank
it's
you.
by a bell.
Okay, any other further comments before we vote on the motion to continue the hearing? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Seconded?
Excuse me?
Yes, I did.
Yep. All those in favor? Aye. Any abstentions or objection? Motion is voted, motion approved. I will suggest that if any counselor has any amendments or suggestions, please forward those to the committee so they can discuss them, and I encourage if they have a meeting between now and then, to actually attend and participate in the discussion. Thank you.
I have a question. I mean, since it's being continued, Councilor Ziegler, is there a date for potential more meeting before the 5th, more discussion? Or can't you make that without Councilor Derby?
I don't think that we'd be able to do that with Councilor Derby being on vacation, so
Okay,
I would actually, I was gonna say, like to make a motion then, propose a motion to continue it for 90 days. I mean, we're gonna definitely need more time than,
Or continue it to the second meeting. Continue it to the second meeting, the public hearing to the second meeting in
Okay.
September. Would that work?
that would.
I will ask for our parliamentarian rules to speak to this. What we have is, we have a motion saying we're gonna continue it to September 5th. Now you want a motion to continue it even longer. Do we have to
Well-
remove the
Are you
previous
talking
motion?
about
We're-
the agenda item?
Well, that's what I'm looking at then, because, again, when we look at the agenda item, it was for public hearing for tonight, but again, we're not going to have any of these questions that have been brought up resolved by September 5th. So although we had the motion, it was approved to move it to September 5th, I just think that I would hate to have people come back again on September 5th and have similar questions, and knowing full well that we're not going to be ready to address them on September 5th.
Would this be a reconsideration?
No, all he has to do is, one, make a motion to extend the agenda item for 90 days, and two, request that the public hearing be continued to the meeting on the 19th of September, if my mathematics is correct. So if you make those two motions, I think that satisfies everything.
We override the first motion.
And the other motion is therefore
Yep.
amended.
19th is correct.
The
Sorry,
19th.
this is Mark Avery.
So you can make two motions.
Okay, did all the members hear that and concur? Okay, that said, please state your motion.
I'd like to motion that we extend the agenda item for Chapter 3 bicycles for 90 days.
Second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion on the table to extend the proposal to amend City Ordinance Chapter 3 bicycles for 90 days. Any more discussion on this motion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye. Any objections or abstentions? None?
And I would also like to motion that we extend the public hearing from this evening until September 19th, the September 19th meeting.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion on the table to continue the public hearing on this issue to September 19th. Any further discussion on this motion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Council Ziegler, you still have the floor.